Hi folks, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. The NTIA is required as part of the Access Broadband Act to report on what they're doing and the effectiveness of that as far as broadband deployment. And they have just now filed their first report, so I'll be talking about that in just a moment. Thanks for joining me. I'm Rick Uzzi here with Zquorum with Broadband Deployment News. So as I mentioned, the NTIA, which is responsible for a lot of the broadband deployment initiatives for the federal government. In fact, they're the ones that are in charge of the new infrastructure bill, and they've also been tasked with kind of trying to put together all of these various federal efforts as far as broadband that we've seen over the past few years. So part of an act, the Access Broadband Act, required that within a year of that act passing that they needed to file their first annual report, and then on a yearly basis file annual reports basically on what they're doing and how effective things are. So I wanted to walk through that since that's just come out. So let's take a look at that. Actually, I think I'm going to go over to here to check that out and read that. So this is the report, December 2021. You can see NTIA and the Department of Commerce. The NTIA is a agency under that, division under that. And basically there's two parts of the report. I'm going to go through part one today, which talks about part one is the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth. That's another agency underneath the NTIA, and talk about some of what they have in part one. And then part two is tracking of the federal broadband investments. A lot of this the tracking would be programs that are already out there, right? Because the infrastructure bill just passed. So there's some things that have been done related to that, but most of that's going to be in the future and would be reported next year. So first, a few things just to kind of cover here. So, what's it all about? So again, this passed as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. The Access Broadband Act establishes the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth. So again, another agency. It gets kind of scary when you start to see the levels of bureaucracy that we have. So we've got the Commerce Department, we've got the NTIA, then we've got the OICG, and then there's stuff under that as well. So, but anyway, this act established the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth within the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, the NTIA, an agency within the Department of Commerce. The act calls for the OICG to engage in outreach and assistance for state, local, and tribal entities, track spending on federal broadband support programs and universal service fund programs, streamline the applications process for financial assistance or grants for such programs, and coordinate with other agencies to enhance efficiency and minimize duplication of federal broadband support. And these are all worthy goals. I'm glad that they are doing this. Again, I don't like the fact that there's so many layers of bureaucracy, but I think this is trying to address that, maybe with another layer of bureaucracy, to try to address that. Because we do have all these federal programs. We've got the FCC, we've got the USDA, have their different broadband programs. We've got the NTIA now that's going to be managing all of this, and I think they're going to be trying to consolidate some of the management of this and coordination between these different agencies. And then I think probably in the future, a lot of new programs would probably go through the NTIA directly, like the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, or the Biden infrastructure bill, basically, for broadband. The 2021 Access Broadband Report is its first annual report prepared under this mandate. The report serves as a baseline of current capabilities and challenges associated with tracking available data across programs. So let's see here. And here's again, out of the legislature from the Access Broadband Act, says not later than 1 year after the date of the enactment of this act, and every year thereafter. And then it talks about what they need to be doing, description of the work of the office, the previous year, and the number of residents for the United States that received broadband, how many residents of the United States were provided broadband, by which universal service mechanism or which federal broadband support program. So which of these programs, USDA Reconnect, RDOF, ARPA, American Recovery Act, an estimate of the economic impact of such broadband deployments. So trying to track how the money is being spent and how effective it is. So part one, again, is on this Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth, an agency that's underneath the NTIA. NTIA established the Office of Internet Connectivity and Growth in July 2021, so this is recent, as directed by the Access Broadband Act. OICG is charged with coordinating a whole government approach to ensure that all Americans can access high speed, affordable and reliable internet, and will carry forward NTIA's commitment to closing the digital divide. So this was all prior to the Biden infrastructure bill, so it's kind of getting a lot of the, again, trying to wrap, the federal government trying to wrap their arms around all of these different programs. And I think it's good that this came about prior to the IIJA so that we can make sure that we're not duplicating efforts and that this money is being spent properly. NTIA also established the Office of Minority Broadband Activities in July 2021, another little layer right there. Established within the OICG, OMBI seeks to expand access to broadband associated devices and services to ensure meaningful use for minorities serving institutions and their students, as well as residents and businesses in communities surrounding those institutions. So again, lots more acronyms here on what these various things are. These are these different minority institutions like historically black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities. We've got Hawaiian serving institutions, Asian American and Native American Pacific, so lots of different institutions there. And they're centered on 4 interconnected areas, their work: fund broadband infrastructure and digital inclusion efforts, leverage data for decision making, that's always good, so that we have the data that we need to be able to make decisions on who has broadband, who doesn't, who's really in need. Facilitate interagency, state, tribal, and private sector coordination. That's good to get everybody, all of the stakeholders involved, and then build capacity of communities. And then again, it's basically just repeating those same things. A few little more details in here, fund broadband infrastructure and digital inclusion efforts. So, financial resources, assisting efforts to expand broadband access among the states, informing development of public-facing tools and resources. As far as facilitating interagency and state and tribal and private sector coordination, maximizing the impact, again, of federal investment. Develop accessible funding resources for communities. Expand data sharing and enhance data quality. Again, these are all worthy goals. Leverage this data for decision making, so building the tools like broadband maps, or at least working with the FCC, for example, on their broadband map that's coming out. Develop capabilities to deepen stakeholder understanding of the digital divide. Provide data to support targeted community capacity planning or capacity building. A lot of that's related to maps or data. Building capacity of communities, so that would mean tools and resources to enable community funding applications. Provide on-the-ground insights to drive broadband expansion and adoption. Build relationships in communities to guide development of actionable tools and resources. So a lot of that's working, federal government working together with these communities and the stakeholders in those communities. Fund broadband infrastructure and digital inclusion efforts. So the OICG provides grant support and funding to enable communities to access robust broadband connections, internet-enabled devices, and the skills to succeed in the digital world. So some of it's about funding to deploy broadband, but there's also funding to help people use broadband. If they are not able to afford devices, they can maybe get a tablet with a subsidy. They can be trained, those kinds of things. In 2021, the OICG released notices of funding opportunities for 3 new grant programs. Now, this is all prior to this latest infrastructure bill. The Broadband Infrastructure Program, the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, and the Connecting Minority Communications pilot program. But this new program is authorized by the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was just passed. The NTIA will oversee broadband funding efforts, providing more than $50 billion to bring affordable universal broadband to communities across America. So then it talks about these 3 programs. So the Broadband Infrastructure Program, again, these first couple were existing prior to this latest infrastructure bill was passed. So you can see, again, there needs to be a coordination of federal agencies because, again, you've got the FCC out there with their programs, like RDOF, for example, Connect America before that. You've got the USDA, USDA Reconnect for rural areas, farmers, that kind of thing. And now you've got these NTIA programs, and you've got this most recent Biden infrastructure bill, the Broadband Equality and Deployment Act, I think it's BEAD, part of the IIJA. So it's all out there. And there definitely needs to be some coordination. This is $288 million deployment program that requires partnerships between a state or one or more political subdivisions of a state and a fixed broadband service provider to support broadband infrastructure deployment to unserved areas. And that's where speeds do not currently reach 25 by 3. So that is unserved in the older definition of things. OICG publishes an announcement of proposed service areas and invited broadband service providers to submit information about the broadband services they offer in any of the proposed service areas, assisting NTIA in targeting federal funds appropriately to areas lacking qualified broadband service. So they're working with the broadband service providers, trying to gather data so we can better target areas that are unserved. And it's in the benefit of the service provider to provide that information so that people don't think their area is unserved, but they need to be accurate about that. But it's in their benefit to provide that information. Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. The Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program provides up to $980 million to eligible tribal entities to expand access to and adoption of broadband service on tribal lands. In addition to infrastructure, the program funds projects that promote affordability and access to remote learning, telework, or telehealth services or resources. And actually, there was just an announcement that they awarded. This was back just a couple days ago. The Department of Commerce, NTIA, awards additional $1 million in grants to tribal groups seeking to expand broadband. So that's under this program. Grants totaling nearly $1 million are being awarded to the Yavapai Apache Nation in Arizona and the Lac Corte Orioles Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians in Wisconsin. So I probably mangled those words, but so you can see that that's been in progress, and they're still making announcements about that. Through investments designed to expand the availability of broadband services on tribal lands and deploy broadband infrastructure to unserved households, the program aims to improve the quality of life, spur economic development and commercial activity, and create opportunities for online entrepreneurship, remote learning, and telehealth in Native American, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian communities. And we've got the Connecting Minority Communities pilot program that provides $268 million, lots of money out there, for the expansion of broadband availability, connectivity, and digital inclusion at these minority institutions like historically black colleges and universities. We got this is Hispanic universities here, again, Asian Americans, just minority service institutions. Through the CMC pilot program, NTIA will directly address the lack of broadband availability, connectivity, adoption, and equity at the nation's HBCUs, TCUs, et cetera, and their surrounding anchor communities. Then there's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act program. That's the huge $1 trillion infrastructure bill that was signed by President Biden last month, I think it was, very recently. And then there's a portion of that which is called the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, BEAD for short, and that's the $42.45 billion in funding and technical assistance to states to develop broadband plans and to subgrantees to construct and deploy infrastructure for the provision of broadband service. So that's the one that right now is being defined. There's still, there's a lot of high-level details, but not a lot of the minutia has been put together on this. So the NTIA has basically 6 months, so until like May of 2022, to send out their first notice of funding opportunities on this, and they'll then be providing more information on the states, the eligible entities, which would be states and territories that can then apply for these funds, and they would then distribute that out in the communities to various service providers. So that's all in the process of being developed right now. Digital Equity Act, that's $2.75 billion. And these are all, I believe that's under the BEAD program as well, or it's under the Infrastructure Act. I don't know if it's specifically under BEAD. $2.75 billion to build state capacity and award grants to promote the achievement of digital equity, support digital inclusion activities, support state efforts relating to the adoption of broadband. Middle Mile Deployment Program, that's under the Infrastructure program. That would be $1 billion to encourage the expansion and extension of middle mile infrastructure to reduce the cost of connecting unserved and underserved areas to the backbone of the internet. So that's to help, if you've got these unserved and underserved areas, you sometimes have to have a middle mile deployment to be able to connect that area to another area so that you can get out to the internet, basically, the backbone. So that's what that's for. Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, again, that's additional money, $2 billion in additional grant funding for the NTIA's existing tribal broadband connectivity program. So that program I was just talking about, they added $2 billion more as part of this infrastructure program. They've got some statistics here on these programs, and again, the IIJA, some of these items are not yet reported on because no money's been allocated on that. But we've got our broadband infrastructure, and that's $288 million in funding. They've had 230 plus applications for a total of $2.5 billion funding requested. The total tribal broadband connectivity, $980 million was available for that. Now again, they're adding another $2 billion there as part of IIJA, and that's 280 plus applications received and $5.79 billion total requested. Then we've got connecting minority communities, $268 million in available funding, 200 plus applications, and as you can see, $833 million total funding requested. So my little note down here, funding requests exceed funding available if you look at that. So obviously more applications than there is money available. There is more money coming in some cases, like $2 more billion to this tribal broadband connectivity, but that's still not going to cover all of the applications that have been placed in the existing program. Leveraging data for decision making. So there's no single data source that includes definitively where broadband services and technologies are available, which speeds they provide, the cost of the service, or the rate of subscriptions among individuals, households, businesses, or organizations. And that's true. That's a problem that we have. That's one of the reasons that data is so important. And that's being addressed as part of a bill that was passed earlier in the year, very early in the year, that required the FCC to create a broadband map that will provide the single source of data that we need to be able to know who has broadband, what speeds are they getting, what's the latency, who the providers are, is an area basically served or unserved. And even if it's served, it's going to be a resource for consumers to go up and select their address and see, let's see, who are my broadband providers? What are they saying I can get? How much are people really getting? Because I believe that's going to be reported. What people are actually getting, what the actual latencies are, what actual speeds are. This is supposed to be aggregating and analyzing existing sources of data compiled from more than 50 sources. And so I got ahead of myself. So there is no good source. Now the NTIA has put together some sources that are better than what we have today with the FCC 477 data. So they're talking here about some maps that they have that do aggregate some data that we have, and including the FCC. And this is talking about the Broadband Data Act, enacted in 2020. Set out new requirements for the FCC to collect granular service availability data from wired, fixed wireless, and satellite broadband providers, and standardized coverage data from mobile service providers, as well as to change the way broadband data is collected, verified, and reported. So that's not yet available, that FCC map. That is supposed to be out, or needs to be out, before any money is allocated as part of this Biden infrastructure bill, the BEAD broadband bill. So the FCC has been working on that even prior to the passage of the bill. So hopefully that will be out. We get information from the U.S. Census Bureau, third-party crowdsourced data such as measurements, speed tests from Ookla, Measurement Lab, and Broadband Now. Independent research organizations like the Pew Research Center. And a lot of this data has been put into what they call the indicators of the broadband need map. And in 2021, the OICG developed and released that map, designed to aggregate multiple third-party data sources and provide tools to the public to understand the digital divide. So again, this is not the map that's required for funds to be released as part of the BEAD broadband bill, right? So that is still coming, but this is a very good map. I did do one of these broadcasts about this map and actually did a demo of it. So I will post in the comments sometime after this goes live. It was live now. Sometimes after I'm finished here, I will post a link to that so that if you want to go back and look at that map, you can. Nti Internet Use Survey. Since 1994, the NTIA has regularly partnered with the U.S. Census Bureau to collect data on computer and internet use in the United States. And that data is included in that broadband needs map that I just was referring to. Asked about the devices and technologies Americans use to go online, locations of internet use, online activities, and challenges they face using the internet. The survey was most recently fielded in November 2021, and the results will serve as the first comprehensive data set on the state of internet use since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that'll be interesting to see what happens after that comparison of the last 2 years. National Broadband Availability Map is a secure cloud-based GIS platform that aggregates data from public and non-public sources to inform broadband policymaking, planning, and investment decision-making with an enhanced understanding of the scope of the digital divide. Then in 2021, they added pricing information, updated speed test data, and included federal investments from the FCC's Rural Digital Opportunity Fund and the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Reconnect program as new layers in that map. Now, where to find that map? This is where it is on the Broadband USA. This is the NTIA site right here. So this is where you find it, the NBAM, and they have participating states here. And you can click on these and get some information on them. In some cases, I don't see anything. So when I click on Florida, for example, there's nothing I can link to. It's just that Florida has agreed to work with the NTIA, but they don't have any links to anything right now. If you click on New Mexico, there's a link. You can click more info, and you come to the New Mexico map. It loads a little slow, so I preloaded this. But here on this map, a little hard for me to see, maybe hard for you to see, but this is basically New Mexico here, and we've got some areas, and you can look at, what do we have here? We got broadband, what does that say? Broadband coverage. So we got broadband coverage, and we've got different technologies. So this looks like it's fiber here. I can click that. I think I clicked it, did I? There we go, fiber. It'll take a moment to pop in there. Like I said, this map's pretty slow for some reason. We'll see fiber, should see fiber pop in. Maybe. Okay, let me try cable. I have to come back this because I noticed earlier I loaded on a different. I loaded on my other PC, so I noticed it took a while. So there's that information. I'll come back here in a minute and see if any of this populates. And then we've got down here. What is this? This is wireless project. Oh, we got project areas. This is unserved locations. I'm going to click on that and see if anything pops in. Nothing so far. So I think it's just being slow. It may not pop in anyway. So anyway, when I was looking at this earlier, I could look at unserved locations. I could see where it was saying fiber was available, where it was saying cable was available. Down here we've got Reconnect. This is the Reconnect grant awards. This is the CAF2. So it shows you where CAF2 money's been awarded, where Reconnect grant money's been awarded, where FCC RDOF was awarded. I'll click that, and again, I've seen no change to the map. So I am thinking that this is just not responding. So not a good map here as far as New Mexico goes. But this is where I think so the NTIA is working with these state organizations on helping them develop these maps and then providing them data that they can then populate in the map to see what their area looks like. And then if the map works, it's a good thing. But in this case, it doesn't look like it's working. Then in other cases, like if you looked at, I think I looked at Tennessee. Click on Tennessee, you go to more info. It does not link you to a map for Tennessee. It links you to their broadband page for the state of Tennessee, and then you can search around in there and look for stuff. So I haven't found this nearly as helpful as the broadband needs map that I looked at, that I demonstrated, that again I'll put a link to here. But this particular map does not appear to be, where is it? Does not appear to be doing anything for New Mexico. Now each state map is going to be different. So this one looks like it's not very efficient. If I reloaded it, it might actually do something. Who knows? I'll reload that and maybe come back to it, but I don't know. I don't think I'm going to spend any more time on this. I'm going to go back to here. So that's that map. Facilitate interagency state, tribal, and private sector coordination. So the OICG collaborates with stakeholders across federal agencies, states, tribes, and industry to work toward the collective goal of closing the digital divide. They promote coordination across the federal government on broadband deployment and digital inclusion efforts, which is good because, again, there's so many agencies doing this. So they enhance collaboration between and among agencies to promote the efficient use of federal funding, align definitions between programs to the extent allowable by statute, and gather information about broadband federal funding options to share with external stakeholders. So those definitions is a good example of where it can get confusing, because the definitions of unserved and underserved can vary from one program to another, but again, it mentions as allowable by statute. So if unserved means one thing under one statute and another thing under another statute, I don't think they can align those two things. But if they can, hopefully they'll be making things less confusing. By reducing permitting delays, that's always good, minimizing paperwork, and designating clear federal points of contact. Sometimes permitting delays can be a real obstruction if you're having a problem getting permits to get pole access, for example. That can be a real challenge. In addition to NTIA, USDA, and the FCC coordinate on a weekly basis, which I was glad to hear, to ensure that federal funding is efficiently allocated to provide maximum benefit to U.S. residents. On June 25th, the agency signed the Broadband Interagency Coordination Agreement. I wonder how they keep up with all these acronyms. To share information about and coordinate the distribution of federal broadband deployment funds. As part of the signed agreement, each federal agency partner will share information about existing or planned projects that receive funding from NTIA, FCC, or USDA. And again, that's great because all three are sending out money right now. Okay, even though the IIJA has not been formulated enough to send out money, and there's still things that have to happen. All these agencies are already sending out funds from these other programs. OICG supports federal agencies in need of broadband expertise to best serve American communities. In 2021, NTIA provided support to the U.S. Department of the Treasury with respect to $350 billion state and local fiscal recovery funds and the $10 billion capital projects program created by the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. So that's another program, ARPA, that the NTIA is overseeing. And there's funds available for right now for that. I did a broadcast about that last week or sometime, so I will post about that as well. I did a broadcast that went through ARPA and all the funds and the applications, the fact that you can do an application on that right now. So I'll link to that after this broadcast. OICG convenes state, local, and tribal leaders committed to closing the digital divide, opportunities for leaders to share priorities and best practices and discuss emerging telecommunications policies. You got the State Broadband Leaders Network, another acronym, SBLN. It convenes practitioners who work on increasing broadband availability and use the state level at use at the state level, and includes participants from all 50 states, DC, and 3 territories. In 2021, OICG hosted 11 meetings and 2 6-week SBLN Summit series. So they're trying to do a lot to educate folks on what's available, so that's good. Digital Equity Leaders Network, the DELN. Make sure, there's going to be a test after this on all these acronyms, so make sure you're ready for that. OICG brings together state, local, and tribal leaders to discuss strategies and share resources for digital equity and inclusion. And there's a tribal engagement and consultations. That is probably the TE and TEC, but they don't mention that here. Over the course of 2021, OICG has conducted 3 government-to-government tribal consultations with tribal nation stakeholders to inform its development of the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. And they got some stats here, 145 members of SBLN. Remember what that was? That's the State Broadband Leader Network. State territories represented by SBLN would be 56, 100 members of the DELN, Digital Equity Leaders Network. I'm just trying to prep you for this quiz. 5 DELN meetings conducted, 700 participants in formal tribal consultations, and 3 formal tribal consultations held. Then build capacity of communities. The OICG supports stakeholders to enable effective broadband planning across the nation. The Broadband USA website, which is what I was just looking at, that's got that map on there. That's also where that broadband needs map is, that I think is so good. That's on that website. That leverages OICG's technical expertise to educate the public on the importance of broadband. Additionally, the OICG supported state broadband planning in 2021 through the SBLN's assistance to states receiving the large influx of federal COVID-19 relief funding available for infrastructure and digital inclusion, as well as direct support to 7 states developing statewide broadband programs and plans. So that's good to know that they're helping the states, because the states are right now trying to get everything in place so that they can get some of this money that's headed towards them from the IIJA. And it's good that they can get some help from the NTIA in getting their broadband offices and programs in place. Broadband USA provides digital inclusion resources, tools, and support for stakeholders, and informs members of federal initiatives with discussions on topics such as federal digital inclusion data, federal funding opportunities, and digital and racial equity, including state-by-state income information on existing digital inclusion programs. So that is, I think I have it up here. No, that was that press release. So that's basically the site, Broadband USA. As I scroll down here, you'll see some recent press releases. What is broadband? They've got a blog up here. We've got state broadband programs. I can click on these and get some information about a state if I want to see what's going on in Texas. I scroll down here and I can see their state websites, broadband contacts, broadband coordinators, that kind of things. And then up here, whoops, go back up. Got information on grant programs, resources. So there's data and mapping that I talked about, grant programs. Here's the broadband equity access and deployment, the most recent one. Middle mile, so digital equity programs. So I talk about a lot of the stuff that's in here in the report. And like I mentioned, resources, federal, tribal, nation states, and then the data and mapping that I was showing, which has this map. Again, I'll post a link to where I demoed that. It's got this map here that I was just looking at that I didn't think was all that helpful. So that's that site. Broadband USA makes broadband funding resources accessible for stakeholders across the country. Broadband USA's federal funding website is a one-stop site for broadband funding resources with information on over 90 federal programs across 13 agencies. So that's another good resource. I didn't actually look at it, so let's go ahead and do that. Open link in a new tab. There we go. So it looks like a list of lots of different programs that are available. Department of Agriculture, that's page 1. Regular pages, yeah. So lots of information there. So you can, I'll post a link obviously to this document that I'm going through right now so you can look through this. So that is part 1. So I just wanted to go through some of these things. And again, they've got some stats here. 33 webinars, 13,287 webinar registrants, 3 technical assistance workshops held in Idaho, Arizona, and Louisiana, 150 communities reached. HBCUs, that's your historically black colleges and universities, engaged in college partnership programs, and participating HBCU students and professors. So 4 HBCUs engaged and 150 students and professors that were participating in that. So a lot of good data there. So that's what I'm going through today. Tomorrow I'm going to go through part 2 of this. I haven't looked through it yet. I don't know how much is in there, so I don't know if I'll get through the whole thing or part of it. But anyway, I thought this was interesting information. And again, I'll post a link to this document as well as the broadband map, anything else I think would be relevant after this broadcast. So I appreciate you joining me today. Thanks so much. And if this was helpful, give me a like on the video. Make sure you subscribe so that you know when I'm live. And you can watch that live or watch it later, watch the recording, and you'll get a notification. Just click the notification bell. Very important when you go to YouTube. Subscribe and click the notification bell if you want to be notified on your browser or your mobile device. You need to make sure that they're set up to receive notifications for YouTube, and you'll just know that I was live. You can choose to watch it or choose to not. That's okay. If you need help with these kinds of things, Zecorn provides a host of, a whole bunch of services that we provide to broadband operators. We've been in business since '95, helping other people get in the broadband, or I should say at that point in the internet business, starting with dial-up. But we provide services that help service providers get in the broadband business, and then once they're in the broadband business, we provide managed services for the broadband provider and their subscribers. So you see our contact information right there. Reach out to us if you'd like some help with that. So thanks again for joining. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.